My parents announced they were selling my 95-year-old grandmother's house while she was sitting right at the dinner table eating her roast chicken. They bragged about bulldozing our family legacy to build luxury townhomes and shipping her off to a budget nursing home because Medicare would cover the bill. My sister and her wealthy husband actually clinked their crystal wine glasses in celebration. What they did not know was that they had absolutely zero legal right to sell a single brick of that property. My name is Maya. I am 32 years old, and this is the story of how my toxic family tried to steal our heritage and ended up losing absolutely everything. Before I continue, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to protect your loved ones from the greed of your own relatives. Growing up in Atlanta, Georgia, my parents, Marcus and Vivian, operated on a strict currency of social status and public perception. To the local community, they were the absolute picture of success. My father was a highly respected community figure, and my mother was a flawless socialite who never missed a charity gala. But inside our home, their conditional love was reserved entirely for my older sister Chloe. Chloe was the golden child, a polished public relations director who married Brad, a white tech investor who dealt in cryptocurrency. They were the ultimate power couple in my parents' eyes. I, on the other hand, was the family stain. I chose to become an independent trust auditor and estate appraiser. It is a highly specialized and lucrative career, but to my image-obsessed family, it was just a blue-collar job. My mother loved to tell her country club friends that I was wasting my life digging through dead people's discarded junk. We were gathered for our monthly Sunday dinner at Nana Joe's house. My grandmother Josephine is 95 years old. Her mind is as sharp as a tack, but she often plays the quiet observer, letting people reveal their true colors before she speaks. Her house smells like decades of Sunday roast lemon polish and rich family history. It is a stunning two-story property with original stained glass windows and intricate woodwork. The neighborhood around us has been completely swallowed by aggressive gentrification. Every week, another historical Black family home is bought for pennies, demolished and replaced with cold, gray, modern boxes. Nana Joe's property sits on a massive double lot, making it the crown jewel of the street. I was carefully placing a platter of roasted vegetables on the heavy mahogany dining table when my mother cleared her throat. She tapped her manicured fingernail against her wine glass to command the room. Her face was lit up with a bright artificial smile that she usually saved for church events. Marcus and I have some wonderful news to share with the family, she announced, looking proudly at Brad and Chloe. We have officially agreed to sell this property to Brad's investment group. The preliminary paperwork was drawn up on Friday, and we are ready to move forward. The room went completely still. I froze with my hands still hovering over the table. I looked over at Nana Joe, who was calmly buttering a dinner roll, seemingly unbothered by the conversation happening around her. I stared at my mother, unable to process the sheer audacity of her words. Sell the house? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Where exactly is Nana Joe supposed to go? Oh. My mother waved her hand dismissively as if I had just asked about the weather. Oh, we have that all figured out. Brad found a highly rated memory care facility called Shady Pines just outside the city limits. It is very practical. The best part is they take Medicare, so it will not cost us a single dime out of pocket. She will be perfectly fine there, and she can make some new friends her own age. Brad leaned back in his antique chair, stretching his legs out. He wore a smug, satisfied grin that made my blood boil. Listen, Maya, he said, using that condescending tone he always reserved for me. The neighborhood is changing drastically. Property taxes are skyrocketing, and holding on to this old place is just bad asset management. My development firm is going to knock this outdated structure down and build 4 high-yield luxury townhomes on the lot. It is just smart business. You estate appraisers might understand the sentimental value of old, dusty furniture, but you simply do not understand real estate yields or investment capitalization. Chloe immediately jumped in to defend her husband, adjusting her expensive designer necklace. Brad is doing Mom and Dad a massive favor, Maya, she sneered. He is taking our family to the next financial level. You should be taking notes instead of arguing with people who actually know how to generate generational wealth. But then again, I guess you are too used to collecting other people's trash to recognize $1 million opportunity when it is sitting right in front of you. I sat there gripping the edge of the antique table until my knuckles turned white. My mother took a delicate sip of her wine, completely unbothered by the fact that she was actively planning to evict her own mother-in-law. My father sliced into his chicken, nodding along with Brad's aggressive financial jargon. They were all complicit. They were all perfectly fine with treating Nana Joe like an expired asset that needed to be liquidated immediately. Chloe looked at me with absolute pity, convinced that she was the superior daughter, securing the ultimate prize. They all believed this dinner was a victory lap. They believed the house was theirs to sell, and that I was just the annoying younger sister who would eventually be forced to sit down and be quiet. I stared directly at my father, demanding he look me in the eye. Shady Pines is currently under investigation by the state health department, I said, my voice slicing through the heavy silence in the dining room. I audited a trust for a family whose father died there due to severe medical neglect. You are not sending my grandmother to a state-funded facility just so Brad can tear down a historic property for a quick payout. My mother let out an exaggerated sigh, pressing her fingers to her temples, as if I were giving her a migraine. Maya, please stop being so utterly exhausting. The brochure Brad showed us was absolutely beautiful. They have a weekly bingo night and a lovely garden. You are deliberately trying to cast a dark cloud over your sister's success, because you are bitter about your own life choices. I am not bitter, I am paying attention, I shot back. You are trading the woman who raised you for a vanity project. That was the breaking point for my father. Marcus slammed his heavy palm flat against the antique mahogany table, making the crystal water glasses rattle violently. He pushed his chair back and stood up, towering over the table to project his ultimate authority. This was a tactic he used constantly to intimidate people into submission. You will watch your tone when you speak to your mother, he thundered, his voice booming with the practiced projection of a church deacon. You do not know the first thing about building a legacy, Maya. You spend your days valuing dead people's trinkets, while Brad and Chloe are actually elevating this family name. Do you have any idea the kind of pressure your mother and I are under to maintain our standing in this city? He paced behind his chair, gesturing wildly. Atlanta is a competitive place for affluent Black families. We have a reputation to uphold at the church, on the charity boards, and at the country club. People look up to us as the standard of excellence. When Brad builds those luxury townhomes, they will bear our family name. That is generational wealth. That is how you secure a legacy. We cannot have our family prestige tied to a decaying old house that costs a fortune to maintain. So your reputation at the country club is worth more than your own mother's safety? I asked, refusing to break eye contact or back down. You are willing to dump her in a facility with a documented history of neglect just so you can brag to your wealthy friends about a real estate development. My father pointed a trembling finger directly at my face, his expression twisting into pure rage. How dare you speak to me about respect? I am the patriarch of this family. I provide the social capital that allows you to walk into any room in this city with your head held high. We are making a necessary sacrifice for the greater good of this family. Shady Pines takes Medicare, which means we do not have to liquidate our own personal assets to care for her. It is basic economics. Chloe crossed her arms and leaned back, nodding along with every word our father said. Dad is right, Maya. We have to think about the future. Brad is offering us a multi-million-dollar buyout for this land. Do you know what that kind of capital can do for Mom and Dad's retirement portfolio? You are being incredibly selfish by making this about your emotional attachment to a house. Brad offered a fake, sympathetic smile, shaking his head, as if he pitied my lack of business acumen. It is tough for people outside the investment world to see the big picture, Maya. You get bogged down in nostalgia. I deal in futures. This property is a gold mine waiting to be optimized. We are taking a depreciating asset and turning it into a compounding revenue stream. It is a win for everyone. A win for everyone except the woman whose house you are stealing, I fired back. My mother slammed her wine glass down, spilling a few drops of red liquid onto the pristine white tablecloth. That is enough, Maya. We did not invite you here tonight to ask for your permission or your professional opinion. We invited you to inform you of a decision that has already been made by the adults in this family. You have spent your entire adult life rebelling against our values, rejecting the corporate job your father secured for you, and embarrassing us with your bizarre career choices. For once in your life, you are going to sit down, shut up, and be a supportive sister. My father remained standing, his chest heaving as he stared me down. The paperwork is being drawn up by Brad's legal team this week, he declared, his voice dripping with absolute finality. The house will be sold, your grandmother will be relocated by next weekend, and this family will move forward into a new bracket of financial success. I will not tolerate any more insubordination from you under this roof. You will respect my authority, or you can leave this dinner right now and not bother coming back. They presented a united, unbreakable front. A wealthy father obsessed with his status, a mother terrified of losing her social standing, an arrogant brother-in-law blinded by greed, and a golden child sister who felt completely entitled to the spoils. They had convinced themselves that their actions were not only justified, but noble. They believed they held all the power, all the leverage, and all the legal rights to do exactly as they pleased. They thought their authority was absolute and unquestionable. I stood there looking at their smug faces, realizing just how far they had fallen into their own delusion of grandeur. I did not need to scream or cry. I did not need to beg them to reconsider, because I knew something they did not. The heavy blue folder lay open on the table between them. The silence in the dining room was so absolute, you could hear the antique grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. My father sat paralyzed, his mouth slightly open, staring blindly at the crystal chandelier above us. The patriarch of the family, the man who had just threatened to throw me out of the house, had been rendered entirely mute by a single stack of paper. Brad let out a frustrated scoff, clearly annoyed that my father had lost his nerve over what he assumed was an outdated deed. He leaned across the table and snatched the document, adjusting his expensive designer cuffs as he prepared to dismiss whatever legal hurdle he thought he was looking at. He scanned the first page, then he flipped to the second. His brow furrowed deeply, and the arrogant smirk that had been plastered on his face all evening slowly melted into a mask of pure confusion. He flipped to the signature page, tracing the embossed notary seals with his index finger. "What is this?" Brad demanded, his voice losing its polished corporate edge. "This says the property title was transferred. Marcus, what is this?" My father could not answer. He just shook his head, his chest rising and falling in shallow, panicked breaths. My mother leaned over, trying to read the dense legal jargon upside down. "Marcus, talk to me," she urged, her voice shrill with rising anxiety. "What does it say? Why are you acting like this? We are signing the sale papers on Friday." "You are not signing anything on Friday," I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of sympathy. "Or on any other day for that matter." Chloe slammed her hands on the table, glaring at me. "Stay out of this, Maya." "Brad, what does the document say?" I stepped forward, taking the document right out of Brad's trembling hands. I held it up so the overhead light caught the gold seal of the state of Georgia. "Let me translate the legal jargon for you, since the real estate genius here seems to have lost his tongue," I said, locking eyes with my sister. 5 years ago, Nana Jo and I sat down with an estate attorney. She recognized that this neighborhood was changing, and she knew exactly how greedy this family would become when the property values skyrocketed. So she made a permanent decision to protect her home. "That is a deed of trust." I continued pacing slowly behind my grandmother's chair, placing my hands protectively on her shoulders. "Specifically, it is an irrevocable trust. 5 years ago, Nana Jo transferred the full legal ownership of this house and the entire double lot into that trust. She retains a life estate, meaning she has the absolute legal right to live in this house until the day she takes her last breath." My mother gasped, clutching her pearl necklace as if she were suddenly struggling to breathe. "An irrevocable trust," she stammered. "But Marcus is the eldest son. He has power of attorney." "A power of attorney does not override an irrevocable trust," I explained, weaponizing my professional expertise to dismantle their delusions. "And more importantly, Marcus is not the trustee. He has absolutely no authority over this asset." Brad stood up his chair, scraping harshly against the hardwood floor. His face was flushed red with a mixture of embarrassment and unhinged rage. If Marcus is not the trustee, then who the hell is? Who controls the property? I looked at him, offering a cold, unapologetic smile. I do. I am the sole trustee. I control the asset. I manage the property. And as the fiduciary, my only legal obligation is to protect Nana Joe's interests and preserve this historical estate. You do not own a single brick of this house. You do not own the soil underneath it. You do not have the right to sell it, tear it down, or leverage it for your failing investment group. You are sitting in my grandmother's house eating her food while planning to steal her legacy, and you have absolutely zero legal authority to do any of it. The room erupted. My mother shrieked, accusing me of manipulating a frail old woman. Chloe burst into tears, screaming that I had orchestrated this entirely to ruin her life and sabotage her husband's business. Brad was frantically typing on his phone, desperately trying to contact his legal team to find a loophole that I already knew did not exist. Through all the screaming and the chaos, Nana Joe remained perfectly still. She slowly reached for her teacup, taking a measured sip of her chamomile tea. She placed the cup down with a soft porcelain clink that somehow managed to silence the entire room. She looked directly at her son. "I am 95 years old, Marcus," she said, her voice carrying the quiet, devastating power of a matriarch who had seen too much. "I am old, but I am not a fool. I watched you and Vivian obsess over country club memberships and luxury cars while neglecting the very community that raised you. I watched you fawn over a white son-in-law who looks at our history and sees nothing but a dollar sign. I knew the moment my health wavered or the property taxes rose, you would try to strip me of my independence and sell my sanctuary to the highest bidder." "Mom, how could you do this to me?" my father pleaded, his voice cracking as his carefully constructed ego shattered. "I am your son. I was trying to protect our financial future." "You were trying to protect your own pride," Nana Joe corrected sharply. "You were willing to lock me in a state-funded facility with strangers just to fund Brad's vanity project. You tried to throw away your own mother for social capital. Maya was the only one who saw the value in our history. She was the only one who treated me like a human being instead of a depreciating asset. That is why she holds the keys, and that is why you hold nothing." Chloe pointed a manicured finger at me, her face twisted with bitter resentment. "You planned this. You kept this a secret for 5 years, just waiting for the perfect moment to humiliate us." "I did not plan your greed, Chloe," I replied calmly. "I did not force you to come here tonight and announce that you were throwing our grandmother into a substandard nursing home. You did that all on your own. I just let you talk. I let you lay out your entire ruthless plan so Nana Joe could see exactly who you all really are." Brad slammed his fist against the wall, his sophisticated tech investor persona completely dissolving into aggressive panic. "This is fraud. We will challenge the trust in court. We will prove she was coerced." I laughed, a genuine, hearty laugh that echoed in the tense room. "Go ahead, Brad. Challenge an ironclad, irrevocable trust drafted by the top estate firm in Atlanta. Challenge a document that has been sitting on the county register for half a decade. By the time your lawyers even file the preliminary paperwork, the legal fees will bankrupt whatever is left of your fragile investment group. You tried to play a game of real estate monopoly with a professional trust auditor. You lost." The absolute finality of my words settled over them like a concrete block. The power dynamic in the room had permanently shifted. The patriarch who demanded absolute obedience was powerless. The socialite mother was disgraced. The golden child sister and her arrogant husband were empty-handed. I stood tall behind my grandmother, feeling the weight of our preserved legacy beneath my feet, knowing that this house, our history, and our future were completely untouchable. The heavy silence that followed my declaration did not last long. Brad was a man who had built his entire career on intimidating people into compliance, and his fragile ego could not handle being outmaneuvered by a black woman he viewed as entirely beneath him. He stepped away from the wall, his chest puffed out, straightening his custom-tailored jacket as he prepared to launch his counterattack. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by the predatory calculation of a man who was used to exploiting the legal system to get his way. "You think you are so smart, Maya," he sneered, closing the distance between us. "You think a piece of paper from 5 years ago makes you untouchable? Let me educate you on how the real world works. I have a team of corporate litigators on retainer who eat amateur trusts for breakfast. By tomorrow morning, I will have an emergency injunction filed in county court. We will challenge the validity of that trust based on diminished mental capacity and undue influence." He leaned in closer, lowering his voice to a menacing register. "Josephine is 95 years old. It will take my lawyers exactly 10 minutes to convince a judge that she was not of sound mind when she signed those documents. We will demand a court-ordered psychiatric evaluation. We will establish a conservatorship and strip you of your fiduciary duties before the week is over." Chloe immediately latched onto her husband's strategy, her fake tears drying up instantly as she saw a new path to victory. "Yes," she cried out, pointing an accusing finger at me. "You manipulated her. You isolated our grandmother and coerced a vulnerable old woman into signing away the family estate. That is elder abuse, Maya. That is a felony. We will call Adult Protective Services tonight. We will have you arrested and thrown in jail for exploiting a senior citizen." My father Marcus seized this lifeline like a drowning man. His bruised ego desperately needed an excuse to invalidate his mother's rejection. He nodded vehemently, stepping up to stand shoulder to shoulder with Brad. "That is exactly what happened. My mother would never willingly bypass me, her eldest son. You must have confused her, Maya. You took advantage of her declining health to steal the property. I will not let you get away with this criminal behavior." Looking at Brad and Chloe standing there with those identical smug, threatening smirks sent me hurtling back to a very specific moment 3 years ago. The air in the dining room suddenly felt exactly like the air in my parents' pristine living room on the night I was completely disowned. 3 years ago, Chloe had blown through $50,000 of our family business's operating budget to cover up a disastrous public relations campaign she had botched. When my father demanded answers about the missing funds, Brad had swooped in to protect his wife. He had fabricated an elaborate spreadsheet and a series of forged bank transfers that conveniently linked the missing corporate funds to a small business loan I had recently applied for. They staged an ambush. They cornered me in the living room and presented their fake evidence to my parents. I had brought my actual bank statements. I had brought literal receipts proving my innocence. But my parents did not even look at the papers in my trembling hands. They took one look at the white tech millionaire son-in-law and chose to blindly trust his polished presentation over their own daughter's desperate pleas. My father had pointed toward the front door, telling me I was a thief, a liar, and a disgrace to the family name. They threw me out into the street with absolutely nothing, while Chloe and Brad clinked champagne glasses celebrating their flawless deception. They had stolen my family from me using nothing but corporate jargon and unearned privilege. But I was no longer that terrified, naive 29-year-old girl begging for a fair trial in a rigged courtroom. I had spent the last 3 years auditing trusts, unraveling complex estate frauds, and learning exactly how arrogant men like Brad operate. I knew their playbook inside and out. I did not flinch. I stepped around my grandmother's chair, placing myself directly in Brad's personal space. "You want to play the medical capacity card, Brad?" I asked, my voice echoing with absolute icy calm. "You want to drag my grandmother into a courtroom and claim she has dementia? Please be my guest. Because when you file that emergency injunction, the judge is going to require medical evidence. And the very first document my attorney will submit is the comprehensive neurological evaluation Nana Jo completed exactly 48 hours before she signed the irrevocable trust." Brad's confident smirk faltered slightly. I pressed the advantage, not giving him a single second to recover. "I knew you would try this." I continued my words, striking him like physical blows. 5 years ago, I drove Nana Jo to a board-certified geriatric psychiatrist. She underwent a rigorous 4-hour cognitive assessment. The doctor certified her as possessing exceptional mental acuity and complete testamentary capacity. We attached that certified medical affidavit directly to the trust documents. It is ironclad. If you walk into a courtroom and accuse me of elder abuse, The judge will look at the date of that medical evaluation, look at your baseless claims, and sanction your attorneys for filing a frivolous lawsuit. My mother, Vivian, gasped, stepping forward with a look of pure panic. You planned this from the very beginning. You set a trap for us. I did not set a trap. Mother, I replied sharply. I built a fortress. There is a massive difference. I knew that the second this property became valuable, Brad would try to steal it to cover his own failures. I knew Chloe would lie to help him, and I knew you and Dad would gladly hand over the keys just to keep up appearances at the country club. I protected Nana Joe from the exact predatory behavior you are displaying right now. Brad clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white. He was breathing heavily, the veins in his neck bulging against his collar. You think you have all the answers, you little piece of trash, he spat, dropping all pretense of civility. You think a medical evaluation scares me. I have resources you cannot even fathom. I will drag this out in probate court for the next 10 years. I will drown you in endless litigation. I will personally fund a legal war of attrition until you are entirely bankrupt and begging me to take this house off your hands just to pay your legal fees. I will destroy you, Maya. He thought his money was his ultimate weapon. He truly believed that his status as a wealthy investor made him an unstoppable force. He thought he could bury me in debt, just like he and Chloe had buried me in lies 3 years ago. It was a beautiful threat. It would have been terrifying if he actually possessed a single dollar of the wealth he was bragging about. I looked at his expensive watch, his custom suit, and his perfectly styled hair. I was about to tear his entire fraudulent life down to the studs. Before I could deliver the final blow to his carefully crafted facade, my mother moved. Vivian stepped directly between Brad and me, physically shielding a grown white man from her own daughter. She threw her arms out in a protective stance, her eyes blazing with a mixture of panic and absolute fury. You are a monster, Maya. My mother hissed, her voice trembling with indignation. You stand there looking so smug while you actively try to destroy your own blood. Do you have any idea how hard your father and I have worked to build this family name? We are a respectable, affluent Black family in Atlanta. We are scrutinized every second of every day by a society waiting for us to fail, and here you are dragging us down into the mud just to satisfy your own petty jealousy. I stood perfectly still, my expression frozen into a mask of absolute ice. I did not blink. I did not step back. I simply let the barrage of insults wash over me, watching my mother weaponize our race and our social standing to justify the theft of her mother-in-law's home. Your sister is the epitome of Black excellence, my mother continued, her voice rising in pitch as she pointed a manicured finger at Chloe. She built a pristine reputation. She married a successful investor. She is securing generational wealth for this family, so we never have to struggle again. Brad is offering us a seat at the tables we have been excluded from for decades. He is elevating us. And instead of supporting your sister, you are trying to humiliate her because you could never achieve what she has. My father, Marcus, quickly moved to stand beside my mother, forming an impenetrable wall of parental authority. He straightened his posture, inflating his chest to project that booming deacon voice he used to command attention at charity galas. Your mother is exactly right. He declared, his tone heavy with righteous judgment. You have always been a deeply selfish girl, Maya. From the moment you refused to accept the corporate position I secured for you, I knew you lacked the discipline required for true success. You do not understand what it takes to survive and thrive at our level. You hide behind your little auditing job pretending you hold some moral high ground, but we all know the truth. You are suffocated by your own mediocrity. You resent Chloe because she is everything you failed to be. The sheer audacity of their delusion was breathtaking. They were standing inside a historic home bought by a Black woman who had survived the Jim Crow era, scrubbing floors and saving every penny to secure a safe haven for her descendants. And yet, here were my parents preaching about Black excellence while actively trying to bulldoze that very sanctuary to appease a greedy white developer. They were willing to sacrifice the foundation of our family history just to maintain their proximity to Brad's perceived wealth and status. Chloe, sensing that our parents had firmly taken her side, stepped out from behind Brad. She wiped away a single, perfectly timed tear, playing the role of the fragile victim under attack. I have tried so hard to include you, Maya. Chloe said, her voice trembling with fake sorrow. I have tried to be a good sister. Brad and I mapped out this entire development project with the family's best interests at heart. We wanted to make sure Mom and Dad could retire in absolute luxury. We wanted to take care of Nana Jo in a modern facility where she would have round-the-clock medical supervision. But you just want to tear it all down. You cannot stand seeing me happy. You want to ruin my marriage and my husband's business just to prove you are smarter than us. Brad wrapped a comforting arm around Chloe's shoulders, kissing the top of her head, as if he were consoling a wounded bird. He looked at me with a smirk of absolute triumph, confident that my parents' blind loyalty had neutralized my legal threats. It is a classic case of projection, Brad stated smoothly, dropping back into his arrogant corporate persona. She feels inadequate, so she attempts to exert control over the only asset she can get her hands on. It is pathetic, really. Marcus Vivian. I am so sorry you have to deal with this kind of toxicity from your own child. You have raised such a beautiful, successful family. It is a shame Maya refuses to participate in your vision. My father nodded gratefully at Brad, absorbing the validation like a sponge. We will not let her derail our future, Brad. I promise you that. Marcus turned his furious gaze back to me. His face was a twisted portrait of wounded pride and desperate ambition. You will sign over the trusteeship, Maya, he commanded, pointing directly at my chest. You will sign the documents relinquishing your control over this property by tomorrow morning. If you refuse, I will personally ensure that your professional reputation in this city is annihilated. I sit on the board of 3 different financial institutions in Atlanta. I will make a few phone calls and your independent auditing firm will lose every major client on its roster. You will never work in estate valuation in this state again. He took a step closer, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me. You think you hold the power because your grandmother signed a piece of paper 5 years ago. You hold nothing. You are nothing without the backing of this family. I gave you your start in life, and I can take everything away from you just as easily as I did 3 years ago. You will surrender that trust, or you will leave this house tonight and consider yourself permanently dead to us. The threat of being disowned was their ultimate weapon. It was the same threat they had executed flawlessly 3 years prior when they threw me out into the street. They expected me to crumble. They expected the crushing weight of parental rejection to break my spirit and force my compliance. They relied on the deep-seated psychological conditioning that demands children unconditionally submit to their parents' authority to maintain family harmony. I looked at my mother, who was nodding along with my father's ultimatums. Her eyes were hard, devoid of any maternal warmth, completely consumed by her desperation to protect her social calendar and her country club standing. I looked at Chloe, who was hiding a satisfied smile behind her hand, reveling in my impending destruction. And I looked at Brad, who was already mentally calculating the profit margins of his luxury townhomes, certain that he had won the war without fighting a single battle. My expression did not change. I did not shed a tear. I did not raise my voice. The cold, hard knot of determination in my chest solidified into absolute steel. I had spent years analyzing financial ruin, tracking the flow of hidden money, and exposing corporate liars. I knew exactly how fragile Brad's empire was because I had audited the very institutions he owed money to. I let the silence stretch, letting their threats hang heavy in the air. I let them bask in their false victory for just a few seconds longer. They had given me their absolute worst. They had played their final hand relying on emotional manipulation and empty intimidation. They had shown me exactly who they were, and they had proven beyond any shadow of a doubt that they deserved absolutely zero mercy. I did not waste a single breath arguing with my father's hollow threats. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out my smartphone. I tapped the screen twice, navigating to the secure folder I had compiled over the past 3 weeks. I walked over to the massive flat-screen television mounted on the wall above the antique credenza. With a quick swipe, I cast my screen directly to the television. The sudden bright glare of the display illuminated the dining room. A highly detailed financial audit report appeared on the screen, complete with red highlighted text and official banking seals. "You want to destroy my professional reputation, Dad?" I asked, my voice echoing with a chilling calmness. "You want to call your friends on the financial boards and tell them I am a fraud. You should probably look at the screen before you make those calls. Because my professional reputation is the exact reason I have access to these documents. As an independent trust auditor, I have clearance to review distressed assets for major financial institutions in this state. I swipe to the next page, zooming in on a specific corporate tax filing. Let us talk about Brad's magnificent investment group, I announced, turning to face the room. The one that is supposedly going to elevate this family to the next financial level. According to the federal bankruptcy filing submitted exactly 4 days ago, Brad's crypto development firm is completely insolvent. He leveraged his entire portfolio on a series of volatile altcoins that crashed last quarter. He does not have a multi-million-dollar buyout for this land. He does not even have the capital to pay his own legal retainer. He is drowning in over $8 million of unsecured corporate debt. Brad lunged forward, his face draining of all color. "Turn that off!" he shouted, reaching for the television, as if he could physically rip the digital document from the screen. "That is confidential corporate information. You hacked my accounts. This is illegal." I stepped neatly out of his way, tossing him a condescending look. "I did not hack anything, Brad. This is public record if you know which bankruptcy court to search. You are a sinking ship, and you came here tonight hoping to use my grandmother's house as a life raft. You thought you could force a quick sale, use the cash to satisfy your most aggressive creditors, and leave Nana Joe rotting in a state facility while you pretended to be a real estate mogul." Chloe was shaking her head violently, her perfect curls bouncing around her pale face. "No," she stammered, looking from the screen to her husband. "Brad, tell them she is lying. Tell them the new development is fully funded. We just bought the new Tesla. We are fine. We are wealthy." I swiped my phone screen again, pulling up a different document. This one featured the seal of the Fulton County Superior Court. "You are not wealthy, Chloe," I corrected her sharply. "You are living on stolen borrowed time. This is a notice of default filed by your mortgage lender 2 weeks ago. You are 4 months behind on the mortgage payments for your pristine suburban mansion. You are in active foreclosure. The bank is scheduled to auction your house on the courthouse steps in exactly 22 days. That designer lifestyle you have been flaunting in my face all evening was bought on maxed-out credit cards and fraudulent collateral." My mother let out a strangled gasp, clutching the edge of the dining table to keep her balance. She looked at Chloe with an expression of sheer horror, not because her daughter was facing financial ruin, but because the illusion of their social superiority had just been shattered. "Chloe, you told me business was booming," Vivian cried out. "You told me the country club fees were on autopay. You lied to us." Chloe burst into genuine tears, now the facade of the golden child completely dissolving into frantic panic. "Mom, I did not know," she sobbed, grabbing her mother's arm. "I swear I did not know about the foreclosure. Brad handles all the finances. He told me it was just a temporary cash flow issue. He told me the townhouse project on Nana Joe's land would fix everything." The room was descending into absolute chaos. The united front that had stood against me just 5 minutes ago was fracturing into pieces. But I was not finished. I had saved the most devastating piece of evidence for last. I looked directly at my father, who was staring at the television screen with a look of dawning terror. He was a man who understood numbers, and the numbers on the screen were undeniable. "You were willing to disown me again, Dad," I said, my voice dropping to a low, steady pitch that demanded absolute attention. "You were willing to throw me out of this house and destroy my career just to protect the man standing next to you. You thought Brad was your golden ticket to the elite social circles of Atlanta, but you really should have checked your own pockets before you invited a thief to sit at your dinner table." I swiped my phone one final time. A bank transfer record appeared on the screen. It was an account statement from my parents' joint retirement portfolio, the one they had spent 40 years building to secure their flawless socialite future. I highlighted a specific transaction dated 3 weeks ago. "When Brad came to you last month asking for temporary advisory access to your accounts to help you restructure your portfolio for better yields, did you actually read the authorization forms you signed?" I asked, watching my father's chest heave with sudden irregular breaths. Because according to this transaction, Brad did not restructure anything. He executed a direct wire transfer. He drained exactly $500,000 from your retirement fund to cover a margin call on his failing crypto accounts. The silence that hit the room was deafening. It was a heavy, suffocating quiet, the sound of a legacy actually dying. My father staggered backward, hitting the edge of the dining table. He raised a shaking hand to his mouth, his eyes locked on the 50-digit routing number and the $500,000 deduction glowing on the screen. Brad, my father whispered, his voice stripped of all its former booming authority. Brad, tell me this is a mistake. Tell me my money is still there. Brad backed away toward the hallway, his eyes darting frantically around the room looking for an exit. He ran a hand through his expensive hair, his arrogant tech bro persona completely gone, replaced by the panicked twitching of a cornered criminal. Marcus. I can explain, he stammered, holding his hands up defensively. It was a bridge loan. I just needed liquidity for a few weeks to keep the creditors at bay. Once the house sale went through, I was going to put it all back with interest. I swear, Marcus, it was just a temporary reallocation of assets. My mother let out a guttural, piercing scream. It was not the elegant, controlled cry of a society woman. It was the raw, visceral shriek of someone who had just watched their entire life savings evaporate into thin air. She lunged forward, her manicured hands curled into claws, aiming directly for Brad's face. You stole from us! Vivian shrieked, thrashing wildly as Chloe tried to hold her back. You stole our retirement. We trusted you. We treated you like a son. We gave you everything and you robbed us blind. My father did not move to stop her. He stood frozen, a broken man staring at the undeniable proof of his own catastrophic misjudgment. He had spent my entire life telling me I was a failure, a disappointment, a stain on his perfect family record. He had demanded absolute obedience and punished me for my independence. And in his blind pursuit of status, he had handed the keys to his kingdom to a man who had stripped him bare. I stood perfectly still, watching the destruction unfold. I felt no pity, I felt no guilt. I simply felt the cold, hard satisfaction of a perfectly executed audit. I had not destroyed their family. I had merely held up a mirror and forced them to look at the rot they had cultivated themselves. They had built their entire existence on a foundation of lies, image, and conditional love. Now the foundation had collapsed and they were completely buried in the rubble. I calmly disconnected my phone from the television, the screen returning to black. The darkness reflected the new reality of their financial situation. I turned to look at my grandmother. Nana Jo was still sitting comfortably at the head of the table, a serene expression on her face. She gave me a single proud nod. I stood at the head of the table observing the absolute wreckage of my family. If someone had taken a photograph of the dining room at that exact moment, it would have looked like a classical painting of a fallen empire. Brad was backed into the corner near the grandfather clock, looking like a trapped rat, calculating his escape route. Chloe had collapsed onto the hardwood floor, clutching her designer knees and weeping hysterically into her expensive silk dress. My mother, Vivian, was hyperventilating, holding onto the back of a dining chair for dear life as she stared blankly at the dark television screen. And my father, Marcus. He slowly pushed himself off the edge of the mahogany table. I watched him straighten his posture, pulling his shoulders back and adjusting his tie in a pathetic attempt to gather the shattered pieces of his dignity. I fully expected my father to lunge at Brad. I expected him to pull out his phone, dial the authorities, and demand justice. I expected the righteous fury of a man who had just been robbed of $500,000 of his hard-earned retirement money. But I had severely underestimated the paralyzing power of my parents' vanity. My father did not look at Brad with rage. He looked at him with terrified calculation. We cannot let this get out, my father whispered, his voice trembling with a horrific realization. If the congregation hears about this, if the board members at the country club find out. I stared at him, my mind struggling to process the sheer absurdity of his words. You are worried about the country club, Dad? I asked, my voice sharp with disbelief. He just stole your retirement fund. He is a criminal. You do not understand how this city works. Maya. My father snapped, his panic morphing into desperate authority. If people find out my wealthy white son-in-law defrauded us, we become a cautionary tale. We become a joke. The respectable black family swindled by a smooth-talking investor who promised them the world. It will destroy everything your mother and I have built. Our social standing, our influence, our entire legacy will be wiped out overnight. My mother suddenly gasped, her eyes widening as she caught on to my father's twisted logic. She released her grip on the chair and rushed over to him, grabbing his arm. "Marcus is right," she said, her voice frantic but resolute. "If Brad goes to federal prison, Chloe is ruined. Her public relations career will be over. The scandal will stick to our family name forever. We cannot be associated with a federal fraud case. We have to cover this up." I looked back and forth between my parents, completely astounded by their psychological sickness. They had just discovered that their golden child's husband was a broke, desperate fraudster who had stolen their life savings. Yet instead of demanding accountability, they were instantly conspiring to protect him. They were so deeply infected by the pressure of maintaining their flawless image that they were willing to swallow a massive financial crime just to save face. My father turned to me, his eyes completely devoid of warmth. "You have to sell the house, Maya." I let out a harsh, humorless laugh. "Are you out of your mind? You have to sign the trust over to me right now." My father continued, taking a step toward me, as if he could physically force my compliance. "We can use the money from the sale of this property to quietly replenish our retirement fund. We can pay off Brad's most immediate creditors to keep the bankruptcy quiet and avoid criminal charges. We can make this whole mess disappear before anyone in Atlanta finds out." "You want me to sell Nana Joe's home to pay off the man who just robbed you?" I asked, pronouncing every word slowly to emphasize the absolute madness of his demand. "You want to reward the thief. You want to kick your own mother out of the house she worked her entire life to buy just so you can protect your precious reputation." Brad suddenly found his courage. Seeing my parents rush to protect him gave him the exact lifeline he needed. He stepped away from the wall, smoothing down his lapels. "It is the most logical solution," Maya, Brad said, actually having the audacity to use his corporate negotiating voice. "If I go down, the whole family goes down. I can still turn my business around if I just have a little liquidity. I can make the money back. We keep this in the family, we sell the lot, and everyone walks away clean." I stepped forward, closing the distance between us until I was standing inches from Brad's face. "You do not speak," I commanded, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "You do not breathe in my direction, Brad. You are a parasite and your business is a Ponzi scheme. You will not see a single penny from this estate." I turned back to my father. "I owe you nothing. Nana Joe stays in this house. The trust remains exactly as it is. If you want to save your precious reputation, you better start selling off your own assets. Sell your luxury cars, sell your vacation shares, downsize your life. But you will not touch a single floorboard of my grandmother's house to fund your cover-up." My father's face twisted into a mask of pure desperation. "I am not asking you, Maya. I am telling you. You will authorize the sale of this property. You owe this family your loyalty." "I do not owe loyalty to a cult of narcissists," I fired back. "You do not care about family. You care about proximity to whiteness and wealth. You let Brad disrespect me for years because you thought his money made him superior. Now that you know he is broke, you are still protecting him because you cannot stomach the humiliation of admitting you were wrong. You are pathetic." Chloe scrambled up from the floor, her makeup running down her face in dark streaks. She grabbed my arm, digging her nails into my blazer. "Please, Maya," she begged, sobbing uncontrollably. "Please, you have to do this for me. My friends will laugh at me. The bank is going to take my house. I will have nowhere to go. I cannot be poor, Maya. I cannot live like that." I looked down at my older sister, the woman who had spent my entire life making me feel small. I reached down and firmly detached her fingers from my clothing. "You should have thought about that before you helped your husband forge documents and steal from our parents," I said coldly. "You made your bed, Chloe. Now you get to sleep in it." I checked my watch, noting the time. "It is getting late," I announced, turning to address the entire room. "Nana Joe needs her rest, and this dinner party is officially over. You all need to leave my grandmother's house immediately." My father stood his ground, his fists clenched at his sides. He looked at me with a hatred so deep, it chilled the air in the room. "You think you have won," he snarled. "You think you can just dismiss us. I am Marcus. I built this family. I have connections in this city you cannot even comprehend. If you do not sign that trust over to me, I will find another way. I will tear your life apart piece by piece until you are begging me to take this property." "Find another way, Dad," I challenged, gesturing toward the front door. "Do your worst, because I promise you, whatever you try, I will be ready for it. Now get out." My parents gathered their coats in stunned silence. Chloe leaned heavily on Brad, weeping as he guided her toward the hallway. They walked out of the historic home they had tried to steal, leaving behind the illusion of their perfect family. The heavy oak front door clicked shut, sealing them out in the cold. I knew my father was a desperate man with a bruised ego. I knew he would not stop here. I knew the war was far from over, but as I turned back to see Nana Joe smiling peacefully at the head of the table, I knew I was fully prepared to burn their entire world to the ground. The aggressive pounding on the heavy oak front door rattled the original stained glass panels. It was barely 7 in the morning. The rhythmic metallic banging was not the polite knock of a neighbor or a delivery driver. It was the synchronized, authoritative pounding of law enforcement. I set down my coffee mug, the ceramic clinking sharply against the kitchen island. I walked down the long hallway, tightening the belt of my robe. When I pulled open the front door, I was immediately blinded by the flashing red and blue lights of an Atlanta Police Department cruiser parked directly on our front lawn. 2 uniformed police officers stood on the porch with their hands resting defensively near their utility belts. Standing between them was a stern woman with a clipboard, wearing a severe gray suit and a badge identifying her as an investigator for the state of Georgia. "Are you Maya?" she demanded, her voice sharp and entirely devoid of pleasantries. "I am," I replied, keeping my posture perfectly straight, blocking her view into the house. "How can I help you, officers?" "I am Agent Miller with Fulton County Adult Protective Services," the woman stated, holding up her credentials. "We received a Priority 1 emergency hotline tip late last night. We have an active report of severe elder abuse, financial exploitation, and false imprisonment occurring at this address. Step aside immediately." The words hit the crisp morning air like physical blows. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I forced my facial expression to remain completely neutral. My father had promised to find another way. He had promised to tear my life apart piece by piece until I was begging him to take the property. I just had not expected him and Chloe to weaponize the state and send armed police officers to my grandmother's house before breakfast. "False imprisonment?" I asked, maintaining a steady gaze. "The anonymous caller reported that you are holding a 95-year-old woman against her will," Agent Miller said, consulting her clipboard. "The report states you have locked her inside, are actively withholding vital prescription medication, and are using psychological coercion to drain her bank accounts and steal her real estate." The caller indicated the victim suffers from advanced dementia and is in imminent physical danger. I have to hand it to Chloe. As a public relations director, she knew exactly which high-alert buzzwords to feed the emergency dispatcher to trigger a rapid tactical response. Imminent danger, advanced dementia, withholding medication. She had painted a masterpiece of a hostage situation, calculating that the sheer shock and terror of an unexpected police raid would force me into submission. They wanted me dragged out of the house in handcuffs in front of the entire neighborhood. They wanted to create a highly public, highly embarrassing spectacle to ruin my reputation, just as my father had threatened. "We need to see Josephine right now," one of the police officers interjected, stepping closer to the threshold. "If you attempt to obstruct this welfare check, you will be placed under immediate arrest for interfering with an active investigation. Do you understand?" The neighbors across the street were already parting their curtains. The flashing police lights were painting the historic homes of our neighborhood in chaotic strokes of red and blue. This was the exact type of public humiliation my parents spent their entire lives trying to avoid, and now they were eagerly inflicting it upon me to secure their own financial survival. I did not panic. I did not raise my voice or try to frantically defend my character. As a trust auditor, I had faced down hostile federal regulators and aggressive corporate lawyers. A fabricated welfare check orchestrated by my desperate sister was not going to break my composure. I understand perfectly, officer, I replied, stepping back and pulling the heavy oak door wide open. Please come in. The three of them marched into the pristine foyer, clearly expecting to find a house of horrors. Instead, they were greeted by the smell of fresh linen polish, brewing coffee and cinnamon. The hardwood floors were gleaming. The antique furniture was perfectly dusted. Agent Miller paused for a fraction of a second, her eyes darting around the immaculate entryway. Her defensive posture dropped slightly as her brain tried to reconcile the horrific abuse allegations on her clipboard with the peaceful, organized reality of the home. "Where is she?" Agent Miller demanded, recovering her strict, authoritative tone. "She is in the sunroom enjoying her morning tea," I said, gesturing toward the back of the house. "I will take you to her. But I must inform you that the anonymous tip you received was entirely fraudulent. It was placed by a family member attempting to retaliate against a legal real estate decision made last night. We will let the victim determine what is fraudulent and what is not." Agent Miller snapped, following closely behind me with the two officers trailing our steps. Financial abusers always have a polished excuse ready. We know how to identify coercive control. We walked through the formal dining room where the remnants of last night's explosive confrontation had already been cleared away. The morning sunlight was pouring through the large French doors leading into the sunroom. There, sitting in her favorite floral-upholstered armchair, was Nana Jo. She was wearing a crisp white blouse, her silver hair perfectly styled. She had a cup of Earl Grey tea resting on the side table and was casually filling out the Sunday crossword puzzle in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution with a blue ink pen. She looked the absolute picture of health, dignity, and peace. Agent Miller stepped into the sunroom, signaling the police officers to hang back near the doorway to avoid overwhelming the supposedly fragile victim. She approached my grandmother with cautious, exaggerated steps. She plastered a wide, patronizing smile on her face and adopted that specific, slow, loud tone of voice people always use when they assume an elderly person is deaf or cognitively impaired. "Good morning, Josephine," Agent Miller said loudly, crouching down to eye level. "My name is Agent Miller. I am here with the police. We are here to make sure you are safe. Do you know what day it is, honey? Do you know where you are?" I stood by the doorway, crossing my arms over my chest and watching the interaction unfold. Chloe and my father had made a catastrophic miscalculation. They had assumed that sending the authorities would intimidate me. They completely forgot that they were also sending the authorities to interrogate Josephine. And if there was one thing my grandmother despised more than greedy relatives, it was being spoken to like a helpless child in her own home. Nana Jo did not immediately look up from her newspaper. She deliberately took her time, filling in the final letters of a 9-letter word for absolute disaster. She capped her blue pen, set it carefully beside her teacup, and finally turned her piercing dark eyes toward the state investigator hovering over her. The camera of my mind seemed to zoom in slowly on her face, capturing the serene, unbothered dignity of a woman who had survived far worse threats than a false police report. "It is Monday morning," Agent Miller, Nana Jo said, her voice crisp and echoing with an undeniable sharp authority. "The date is October 14th. I am sitting in the sunroom of the property I purchased with cash in 1968. The current president is in his second term. The Dow Jones opened down 50 points today, and the answer to 7 across was catastrophe, which coincidentally perfectly describes how you and these two officers are going to feel when you realize you have been weaponized by my desperate relatives." Agent Miller blinked rapidly, standing up straight and taking a sudden step back. The patronizing smile vanished from her face, instantly replaced by the cautious realization that she was not speaking to a confused victim of dementia. "Ma'am," she stammered, glancing nervously at the police officers behind her. "We received a very detailed emergency report stating you were being starved, locked inside your room, and deprived of your blood pressure medication by your granddaughter." Nana Jo let out a sharp, dry laugh. "My blood pressure is 120/80, which is frankly a medical miracle considering the severe disappointment my eldest son has turned out to be. My granddaughter Maya prepares me a fresh breakfast every morning. I manage my own prescriptions, which you will find perfectly organized in the kitchen cabinet. I also hold the only key to the deadbolt on that front door. If anyone is being held hostage in this house, it is Maya who has to listen to me complain about the terrible plot twists on my afternoon soap operas. One of the police officers finally stepped forward, his hand dropping away from his utility belt. He looked from my grandmother to me, a look of deep, professional embarrassment crossing his face. Ma'am, if you are not in danger, then why would someone call the emergency hotline and fabricate such specific, horrific allegations against your granddaughter? Filing a false report of elder abuse is a serious crime. They did it because they are entirely out of options, Nana Jo explained, her voice hardening into steel. My son Marcus and his daughter Chloe are deeply terrified of losing their social status in this city. Chloe's husband, a developer named Brad, just bankrupted his investment firm. They are facing foreclosure on their suburban mansion. Last night, they came to my house, ate my food, and announced they were throwing me into a state-funded facility called Shady Pines so they could demolish my home and sell the land to cover his massive corporate debts. Agent Miller furiously began taking notes on her clipboard, the entire narrative of her investigation flipping in real time. They tried to evict you, she asked, her tone shifting from accusatory to protective. They tried, Nana Jo corrected smoothly. But Maya here is a professional trust auditor. 5 years ago, she helped me place this property into an irrevocable trust, making her the sole trustee. My son and his fraudulent son-in-law discovered last night that they have absolutely zero legal right to sell my home. They threatened Maya. They threatened me. They said they would destroy Maya's career and drag me into probate court, claiming I was mentally incompetent. When Maya threw them out, they clearly decided to execute their threat and send you here to humiliate her and intimidate me into surrendering my property. Agent Miller looked at me, then back at my grandmother. This is a severe allegation, Josephine. While you appear completely lucid and perfectly safe, we are dealing with a, she said situation regarding the threats. Without proof of their intentions, it will be difficult to pursue charges for the false report. Financial abusers often use these exact tactics to force property sales, but proving the coercion in a court of law requires hard evidence. I do not deal in, he said. She said, Agent Miller, Nana Jo stated calmly, reaching her hand deep into the pocket of her knitted cardigan. I am a 95-year-old black woman who grew up in the Jim Crow South. I learned a very long time ago that when people with power threaten to take what belongs to you, you never take them at their word. You get it on the record. My grandmother pulled her hand out of her pocket. Resting in her palm was a small, sleek digital voice recorder. She set it on the glass coffee table right next to her teacup. When my son invited himself over for dinner last night to discuss family business, I knew exactly what he was coming for, Nana Jo explained, pressing her finger against the device. I taped this directly under the dining room table before they arrived. She pressed the play button. The audio quality was crystal clear, cutting through the quiet sunroom. The voices of my family members filled the space, echoing with all the arrogance and cruelty they had displayed the night before. The officers heard my mother Vivian cheerfully announcing that they were shipping Nana Jo to Shady Pines because Medicare would cover the bill. They heard Brad's condescending rant about real estate yields and tearing down the historic property for luxury townhomes. They heard Chloe whining about her designer lifestyle and demanding I stop being an obstacle to her generational wealth. Agent Miller stopped writing her pen, hovering over the clipboard as the true nature of my family was laid bare. But the most damning evidence was yet to come. The recording played my father's furious, booming voice after I revealed the existence of the irrevocable trust. You will sign over the trusteeship, Maya, my father's recorded voice thundered. You will sign the documents relinquishing your control over this property by tomorrow morning. If you refuse, I will personally ensure that your professional reputation in this city is annihilated. Then came Brad's voice, dripping with predatory malice. You think a medical evaluation scares me? I will drag this out in probate court for the next 10 years. I will drown you in endless litigation. I will personally fund a legal war of attrition until you are entirely bankrupt and begging me to take this house off your hands. Nana Jo reached out and pressed the stop button. The heavy silence that followed was entirely different from the silence at the dinner table. This was the silence of absolute legal validation. I believe that covers the coercion, the threats of extortion, and the explicit intent to weaponize the legal system for financial gain, Nana Joe said, looking directly at the police officers. I also believe you now know exactly who placed that anonymous emergency call this morning. My son and his son-in-law are desperate, dangerous men who will stop at nothing to cover up their financial crimes. Agent Miller let out a long, slow breath, shaking her head in disbelief. She aggressively crossed out the entire first page of her report. "Mrs. Williams," she said, addressing my grandmother with profound respect, "I sincerely apologize for the intrusion this morning. You are clearly the victim of an attempted coordinated financial extortion by your own family. The allegations against your granddaughter are completely unfounded. I will be closing this case against her immediately and opening a new investigation into your son and son-in-law for attempted elder financial exploitation." The two police officers nodded in agreement, their hands now resting on their radios instead of their weapons. "We will need to take that recording as official evidence," one of the officers said, pulling out an evidence bag. "Filing a false priority. One emergency report is a crime. Attempted extortion is a crime. We will be paying a visit to Marcus and Brad this morning to have a very serious conversation about wasting police resources to conduct a personal vendetta." I stepped away from the doorway, walking into the center of the sunroom. The tension that had been gripping my chest since the police arrived finally dissolved into a cold, calculating energy. My grandmother had just expertly dismantled their false abuse narrative, but I knew that sending the police to issue a warning for a false report would not be enough to stop men like Marcus and Brad. They would just hire expensive defense attorneys and spin the situation as a family misunderstanding. I needed to give the police something that could not be spun. I needed to give them a felony that carried mandatory federal prison time. "Officers," I said, my voice steady and authoritative, drawing all their attention to me. "A false police report and attempted extortion are certainly serious charges, but if you are going to pay a visit to Brad and my father this morning, you should probably bring the fraud division with you." Agent Miller frowned, looking at me with renewed intensity. "The fraud division. Do you have evidence of another crime, Maya?" I did not just have evidence, I had the kill shot. I reached into the inner pocket of my blazer and pulled out a neatly folded document. It was the preliminary sale contract that Brad had bragged about last night. The document my parents claimed they were going to finalize on Friday to sell the land to Brad's investment group. Last night, Brad stated he had already drawn up the preliminary paperwork to sell this historic estate to a commercial development firm, I explained, unfolding the heavy parchment paper. As the sole legal trustee, I obviously never signed any real estate transfer documents. Nana Joe has not possessed the legal authority to sign a property transfer in 5 years. And yet Brad somehow managed to secure a massive commercial bridge loan from a private lender last week using this exact property as collateral. I handed the document to the lead police officer, tapping my finger against the bottom of the final page. In order to secure that commercial loan, Brad had to provide the lender with a signed intent to sell contract. I continued watching the officer's eyes widen as he read the text. "If you look at the bottom of that contract, you will see my grandmother's signature authorizing the sale of the estate." Nana Joe leaned forward, inspecting the document in the officer's hands. She let out a sharp, disgusted sigh. "I have not signed my name in cursive since my arthritis flared up 3 years ago," she stated flatly. "And I certainly never signed my name using blue gel ink." The police officer looked up from the document, his expression shifting from professional concern to the sharp, focused intensity of a cop who had just been handed a major felony case. "This signature is forged," the officer confirmed, looking directly at me. "Yes, it is," I replied, delivering the final, devastating truth. Brad forged the signature of a 95-year-old woman on a commercial real estate contract to fraudulently secure a multi-million-dollar loan across state lines. That is not a family misunderstanding, officers. That is federal wire fraud. That is bank fraud. And that is exactly what they are desperately trying to cover up. The lead officer stood completely still. His eyes locked onto the document in his hands. The focus of the entire room seemed to shift from the absolute shock on his face directly to the crisp blue ink of the forged signature staining the white paper. For a long, tense moment, the only sound in the sunroom was the low crackle of the police radio on his shoulder. When he finally looked up, the professional detachment of a patrol cop had been replaced by the razor-sharp intensity of an investigator who had just been handed a career-defining case. "You understand the gravity of what you are handing me right now?" the officer asked, his voice dropping an octave. If this man transmitted this forged contract to a financial institution across state lines to secure a commercial loan that triggers federal jurisdiction, we are talking about the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We are talking about mandatory minimum sentencing for wire fraud and bank fraud. "I understand exactly what I am handing you, officer," I replied without a single ounce of hesitation. "I am an independent trust auditor. I spend my entire professional life tracking fraudulent assets and building airtight cases against white-collar criminals." Brad thought he was a genius. He used a shell corporation to apply for the commercial bridge loan, leveraging my grandmother's historic address as the primary asset. He assumed that because my parents supported him unconditionally, no one would ever look closely at the paperwork. I took a step closer, pointing to the top margin of the contract where the digital timestamp was printed. "But because I am the sole legal trustee, any lien title inquiry or loan application attached to this address triggers an automatic security alert to my firm's monitoring system." He tripped the wire 3 days ago. I pulled the digital filing directly from the lender's portal, and there it was, a fraudulent intent to sell complete with a forged signature. He did not just commit a crime. He left a digital footprint a mile wide, including the IP address that proves he uploaded this forgery directly from his home office in the suburbs. Agent Miller let out a sharp, furious breath. The realization of how deeply she had been manipulated was washing over her entirely. She gripped her clipboard so tightly, her knuckles turned white. "They weaponized a state protective agency," she said, her voice vibrating with pure, unfiltered anger. "They filed a false report of elder abuse to trigger an armed police raid on your home, hoping the sheer terror of the situation would force you to surrender the property before you could expose their bank fraud. They tried to use me as an attack dog to cover up a federal felony." "Yes, they did," I confirmed. "And when that failed, they fully expected to use the chaos of my arrest to strip my grandmother of her rights and finalize the sale before the lender realized the collateral was completely bogus. They thought they could silence me with handcuffs and public humiliation." The second police officer unclipped his radio, stepping out into the hallway to avoid the echo of the sunroom. "Dispatch, we need the white-collar crime unit to mobilize immediately," he barked into the receiver. "We also need to loop in the federal field office. We have a confirmed case of wire fraud, bank fraud, and attempted extortion. I need a squad car dispatched to secure a secondary location right now." The lead officer carefully slid the forged contract into a clear plastic evidence bag, sealing it with a definitive snap. "We are going to need the original recording from under the table," he said, looking at Nana Joe. "We will also need certified copies of the irrevocable trust, the medical evaluation, and the loan application you pulled from the portal." I turned to the antique credenza in the corner of the room. I opened the top drawer and pulled out a thick, perfectly organized binder. It was tabbed, indexed, and color-coded. I had spent the early hours of the morning before the police even arrived, ensuring every piece of evidence was ready for a prosecutor. "I already prepared a complete evidentiary packet for the district attorney," I said, handing the heavy binder to the officer. "The USB drive in the front pocket contains the unedited audio recording of my family attempting to extort me last night. The trust documents, the medical records, the forged loan applications, and the metadata tracking Brad's digital uploads are all notarized and chronologically sorted. You have absolutely everything you need to arrest him right now." The officer took the binder, staring at it with a mixture of awe and deep professional respect. "You do not mess around, Maya," he said, shaking his head slightly. "Not when it comes to my family's legacy," I replied coldly. "And certainly not when it comes to arrogant men who think they can steal from black women without consequence." Agent Miller stepped forward, extending her hand to me. I took it, and she gave me a firm, decisive shake. I am going back to my office to file my official report, she said, her tone shifting from an investigator to a fierce ally. I am officially classifying your grandmother as the victim of attempted financial exploitation by your father Marcus and your brother-in-law Brad. My report will be fast-tracked and made available to the prosecutors today to support the extortion and fraud charges. You protected her beautifully, Maya. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise. Thank you, Agent Miller, I said. The officers turned toward the hallway. Their demeanor entirely shifted from the hostile enforcers who had arrived 20 minutes ago. They were now moving with the rapid, aggressive purpose of a strike team preparing to take down a major target. Do you have the current address for Brad and Chloe? The lead officer asked, pausing at the threshold of the sunroom. I recited their address in the affluent northern suburbs without missing a beat. It is a massive gray brick mansion with a pristine manicured lawn, I added, ensuring they had the exact visual. You cannot miss it, but you might want to hurry. Now that the sun is up, my father and Brad are likely scrambling to finalize their cover-up. They probably think they hold all the cards this morning. They are likely sitting around their kitchen island drinking premium coffee and waiting for my panicked phone call. They are about to find out they are playing a completely different game, the officer said, a grim, satisfied smile touching the corner of his mouth. Nana Jo picked up her teacup, bringing it to her lips. She took a slow, elegant sip before calling out to the departing officers. Officers, she said, her voice light and highly conversational. They turned back to look at her, their expressions respectful. When you kicked down the door of that ridiculous suburban mansion and slapped the cuffs on my arrogant son-in-law, Nana Jo said, a sharp, wicked gleam dancing in her dark eyes. Be sure to tell my son Marcus that his mother says good morning. The officers chuckled, nodding their heads in profound respect before marching out of the sunroom. The heavy front door clicked shut behind them. Through the large original glass windows, I watched the police cruiser pull away from the curb. The flashing red and blue lights disappeared down the street, speeding directly toward the fragile illusion my parents and sister had sacrificed their entire moral compass to build. The trap had not just been sprung. It had clamped shut with bone-crushing force, and now the only thing left to do was sit back and watch the fallout completely destroy them. The illusion of control at my parents' suburban mansion lasted exactly 45 minutes longer. While I sat in my grandmother's sunroom pouring a fresh cup of tea, the tactical reality of my audit was crashing through their front door. I would later review the official police reports and the interrogation room transcripts during the discovery phase of the trial. The synchronized destruction of their flawless family facade was a masterpiece of their own making. Marcus and Vivian were sitting at their custom marble kitchen island, sipping premium imported coffee. Chloe was nursing a mimosa, checking her phone every 10 seconds, waiting for me to call and surrender the trust. Brad was pacing the length of the open-concept living room, still wearing his arrogant tech investor persona, completely convinced that sending an armed police raid to my house had secured his victory. They were celebrating their ruthless brilliance. They did not hear the convoy of unmarked federal vehicles and local police cruisers pull into their pristine driveway. They only heard the thunderous, simultaneous pounding on their front and back doors, followed immediately by the sound of a battering ram breaching the heavy mahogany entrance. Federal agents and white-collar crime detectives flooded the grand foyer. They did not ask politely. They moved with the aggressive, targeted precision of a task force that had just been handed a silver platter of undeniable evidence. Within seconds, Brad was slammed against the imported marble countertops, his hands wrenched behind his back and secured in cold, heavy handcuffs. The designer suit he wore, like armor, offered absolutely zero protection against a federal wire fraud warrant. The scene shifted rapidly from the chaotic raid at the mansion to the sterile, windowless interrogation rooms at the federal field office. The unbreakable loyalty my family claimed to possess evaporated the absolute second their personal freedom was threatened. The classic prisoner's dilemma unfolded perfectly, and none of them had the moral backbone to stay silent. Brad was placed in interrogation room A. The polished, arrogant millionaire was reduced to a shivering, sweating mess in under 10 minutes. The moment the federal detectives dropped a copy of the forged real estate contract on the metal table alongside the digital metadata, proving he uploaded it from his home IP address, Brad completely broke. He did not ask for a lawyer right away. He was too arrogant to realize he was already buried. He thought he could fast-talk his way out of a federal felony by throwing the patriarch of the family under the bus. "Marcus made me do it," Brad stammered, his voice pitching upward in frantic desperation. "He is the head of the family. He controls everything. He told me Josephine was losing her mind and that the family desperately needed liquidity to maintain their social standing. He is the one who provided the property deeds. I just processed the paperwork." Marcus orchestrated the entire thing because he was terrified of losing his country club memberships. It was his mother's signature. He told me to sign it. In interrogation room B, directly across the hall, my father was facing his own reckoning. Stripped of his tailored suits and his booming deacon voice, Marcus was a portrait of pathetic desperation. When the detectives informed him that Brad was already in the next room, naming him as the criminal mastermind, Marcus completely lost his mind. The man who had demanded absolute obedience from me, the man who had sold his soul to protect his white son-in-law, turned on Brad with a vicious, unfiltered hatred. "He is a predator," Marcus shouted, slamming his fists against the metal table, his chest heaving with panic. "That man is a con artist who manipulated my entire family. He lied about his wealth. He lied about his crypto investments. He stole $500,000 from my personal retirement account just 3 weeks ago. I never told him to forge my mother's signature. He did this on his own to cover his bankrupt corporate schemes. He used us. He used our respectable black family name to secure fraudulent loans." The detectives simply sat back, crossing their arms, as my father eagerly provided them with the exact financial motives needed to secure Brad's conviction. Marcus was so desperate to clear his own name regarding the forgery that he actively confessed to knowing Brad was a fraud, attempting to paint himself as a victim. He completely forgot that just 12 hours earlier he had threatened to destroy my career to protect that very same fraudster. Meanwhile, back at the suburban mansion, the true nightmare for my mother was unfolding on her perfectly manicured front lawn. Vivian was standing outside in her silk robe, surrounded by federal agents carrying out boxes of financial records, desktop computers, and Chloe's expensive designer laptops. But the police presence was not the worst part for her. The worst part was the audience. The neighbors, the affluent doctors, lawyers, and business owners she had spent decades trying to impress, were standing on their porches and sidewalks. They all had their smartphones out, recording the spectacle. The pristine, flawless image of Atlanta's most successful black family was being dismantled live on neighborhood watch applications. The socialite crown my mother wore so proudly was being crushed under the boots of federal agents. Chloe was standing near the driveway, screaming hysterically as an officer tagged her luxury SUV for impoundment. The vehicle had been purchased with fraudulent funds, and it was now federal evidence. Seeing her precious status symbols being stripped away, Chloe turned her absolute rage onto her parents. The golden child, the daughter who could do no wrong, finally snapped under the pressure of losing her wealth. "This is your fault," Chloe shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at Vivian. "You and Dad pressured us. You demanded we maintain this ridiculous standard of wealth to make you look good at church. You pushed Brad to make riskier investments just so you could brag about his portfolio to your friends. You built this fake life, and now I am going to lose my license and go to prison because of your obsession with perfection." The betrayal cut deeper than any legal charge. Vivian collapsed onto the manicured grass, weeping not out of remorse for what they had done to Nana Joe and me, but out of pure, unadulterated shame that her community was watching her family implode. Back in the interrogation rooms, the crossfire of accusations reached a fever pitch. The detectives moved between the rooms, feeding Brad and Marcus pieces of each other's confessions, watching them dig their own graves deeper and deeper. Brad, desperate to secure a plea deal, decided to offer up his own wife. He looked at the federal agent, tears of pure cowardice streaming down his face. "I did not make the false emergency call to Adult Protective Services this morning," Brad confessed, pushing the final domino over. "Chloe made the call. She has a burner phone hidden in her designer purse. She told the emergency dispatcher that Maya was starving the old woman. She orchestrated the armed police raid. I had nothing to do with it. She is the one who tried to weaponize the police against her own sister. By noon, the federal detectives did not even need to ask any more questions. The family had provided enough cross-incriminating statements, audio recordings, and digital evidence to secure federal indictments for all of them. They had turned on each other with the speed and viciousness of starving wolves. The fortress of conditional love, built entirely on the fragile pillars of wealth status and public perception, completely collapsed the absolute second their personal survival was threatened. They had no loyalty. They had no honor. They had no family bond. They only had their greed and their crippling fear of losing their social standing. And now, because they had underestimated the daughter they threw away, they were going to lose absolutely everything. The world tilted on a severe jagged axis inside interrogation room C. The harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting long, unnatural shadows that seemed to stretch and distort across the sterile gray walls. Chloe sat alone at the cold metal table, her designer silk dress wrinkled and stained with dried tears. The psychological foundation of her entire existence was severely off balance. Everything she had built, her pristine public relations career, her flawless marriage, her status as the untouchable golden child, was aggressively sliding into a terrifying abyss. Two federal agents walked into the slanted reality of her interrogation room. They did not yell. They did not slam their hands on the table. They simply placed a small digital recorder between them and pressed play. The room filled with the panicked, desperate voice of her husband. Chloe heard Brad eagerly and specifically detail how she had purchased the burner phone. She listened to the man she had proudly flaunted at country club dinners explicitly outline how she had orchestrated the false emergency call to Adult Protective Services. He handed the federal agents her motive, her method, and her timeline, serving her up on a silver platter just to shave a few years off his own inevitable prison sentence. The audio clicked off. The absolute silence that followed was suffocating. For a fraction of a second, Chloe stared blankly at the recorder. The federal agents waited for the inevitable breakdown. They expected the hysterical sobbing of a wealthy suburban housewife who had just realized she was going to a federal penitentiary. They expected her to scream that her husband was a liar. But Chloe did not cry. The fragile weeping victim act vanished completely. In its place emerged the cold, ruthless calculus of a desperate public relations executive operating in high-level crisis management mode. Her moral compass, already deeply warped, completely snapped. The concept of family loyalty was instantly replaced by an aggressive primal instinct for self-preservation. "I want my personal attorney," she stated, her voice dropping to a flat, emotionless pitch. "Not the family lawyer. Not the corporate counsel my father uses. I want my own independent representation right now, because I have a lot to say, and I am only going to say it once." Within the hour, a sharp, aggressive defense attorney was sitting next to her. The federal agents returned, ready to formally charge her with filing a false police report and conspiracy to commit extortion. But Chloe raised a perfectly manicured hand, stopping them in their tracks. "I am a public relations director." Chloe began, leaning forward, her posture unnaturally rigid. "My entire career is built on knowing exactly how to control a narrative and how to mitigate a disaster. I knew my husband's crypto firm was bleeding money 6 months ago. I knew he was moving assets around to hide his insolvency from his investors and from my father. And because my professional license requires me to maintain a flawless public record, I made absolutely certain that I secured an insurance policy in case he ever tried to pull me down with him." She turned to her lawyer, giving a sharp nod. "I will give you everything," Chloe promised the federal agents, her eyes completely devoid of warmth. "I have a hidden encrypted cloud drive that mirrors Brad's personal laptop. It contains the routing numbers for offshore accounts he used to hide capital before filing for bankruptcy. It contains emails proving he intentionally defrauded his original investors. It contains the exact timestamps showing when he downloaded the forged signatures to secure the commercial bridge loan on my grandmother's property. I will hand over the encryption keys right now. I will testify against him in open court. I will give you the head of the operation on a silver platter." The lead agent crossed his arms, studying the woman who was enthusiastically selling her husband to the federal government. And in exchange, he asked. "In exchange, I want absolute transactional immunity," Chloe demanded without a single shred of hesitation. "I want the extortion and false report charges against me dropped immediately. I want my name completely scrubbed from the federal indictment so my public relations license remains intact. You get a slam-dunk conviction for wire fraud, bank fraud, and corporate embezzlement. I get to walk out of this building with a clean criminal record." Her lawyer slid a formal proffer agreement across the metal table. Chloe did not stop there. She reached into her designer handbag, which the police had returned to her after a thorough search, and pulled out a sleek leather-bound notepad. She ripped a blank page from it and grabbed a pen. "And one more thing," she added, writing furiously. "I am filing an emergency petition for divorce due to irrecoverable breakdown of the marriage and criminal fraud. Brad used my personal credit lines to fund his failing business without my informed consent. I want a complete legal severance filed before the markets open tomorrow morning." She took off her massive 4-carat diamond engagement ring, the very same ring she had shoved in my face for years as proof of her superior worth. She dropped the heavy diamond onto the metal table with a dull clink, pushing it toward the federal agents. "You can add that to the asset forfeiture pile," she said coldly. "I am officially disconnecting my personal brand from his radioactive fallout." In the span of an hour, the golden child had ruthlessly immolated her own husband to save her own skin. She traded the man she had loved, the man she had helped steal from our parents, for a get-out-of-jail-free card. Her loyalty was a transaction, and the currency had just run out. While Chloe was executing her cold-blooded betrayal in Room C, my mother Vivian was experiencing a complete psychological collapse in a holding area down the hall. Vivian had been detained for questioning regarding the unauthorized transfer of funds from the joint retirement account. She was sitting on a hard plastic chair, her silk robe replaced by the harsh reality of a federal building. She was completely disconnected from the legal jeopardy she was in. Her mind was entirely consumed by the catastrophic destruction of her social standing. A detective walked into the holding area carrying a clipboard. He informed Vivian that she was free to leave as the financial transfer had been initiated by Brad and authorized by Marcus, though under fraudulent pretenses. But before she could stand up to demand a private car, the detective delivered the final devastating update. "Ma'am, you should know that your son-in-law has formally confessed to federal wire fraud," the detective stated plainly. "And your daughter Chloe is currently finalizing an immunity deal. She has handed over all of his financial records and filed for an emergency divorce. She is actively testifying against him and your husband to avoid prison time." Vivian froze. The words seemed to hit her with a physical, delayed impact. The meticulously crafted world she had spent 40 years building, the world of charity galas, country club luncheons, and perfect Sunday church appearances, was disintegrating into a pile of toxic ash. "My Chloe." Vivian whispered, her eyes wide and unblinking. "She is testifying against Marcus. She is divorcing Brad." "Yes, ma'am," the detective replied. "It is a full federal investigation now. The press has already picked up the story from the local police blotter. There are news vans currently parked outside your gated community." That was the breaking point. The threat of prison had not shattered my mother. The loss of her retirement fund had not broken her spirit. But the undeniable reality that her affluent black family was about to become the headline scandal on the evening news was a fatal blow to her sanity. Vivian began to hyperventilate. Her hands clawed desperately at her chest as she struggled to draw air into her lungs. "No," she gasped, rocking back and forth on the plastic chair. "No, no, no. The women at the auxiliary board, the deaconess committee. Everyone will see. Everyone will know we are bankrupt. They will know Brad is a criminal. They will know my daughter is a federal informant. We are ruined. We are an absolute joke." She let out a piercing, agonizing wail that echoed down the sterile hallway. It was the sound of a narcissist realizing that the mirror had shattered, and she could never put the beautiful reflection back together again. She was entirely bankrupt financially, socially, and morally. The golden child had proven to be a treacherous snake. The wealthy white savior son-in-law was a broke federal felon. The powerful patriarch husband was facing criminal conspiracy charges. And the daughter she had thrown away, the one she had called a failure, was sitting safely in a historic multi-million-dollar estate watching their entire fraudulent empire burn to the ground. 72 hours. That was exactly how long it took for my mother to exhaust every single social connection, every favor, and every ounce of goodwill she had spent 40 years cultivating in Atlanta. When the federal indictments hit the evening news cycle, her country club friends stopped returning her calls. Her pastor suddenly became unavailable. The wealthy circle she had worshipped treated her like a highly contagious disease. With her husband sitting in a federal holding cell, her golden child actively testifying against the family, and her bank accounts frozen by investigators, Vivian had absolutely nowhere left to go. I was standing in this grand foyer of Nana Joe's house, admiring the newly polished stained glass when the doorbell rang. I did not need to check the security camera to know who was standing on my porch. The frantic, irregular pounding on the heavy oak door carried the distinct rhythm of utter desperation. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. My mother stood on the welcome mat, a stark hollow shell of the flawless socialite she had been just 3 days ago. Her designer blowout was flat and unkempt. The pristine makeup she used as armor was completely gone, revealing the deep, exhausted lines around her eyes and mouth. She was wearing a trench coat hastily tied over a wrinkled dress, shivering in the afternoon breeze. She looked up at me, and for the first time in my entire 32 years of life, the power dynamic physically shifted. I stood tall in the doorway, my posture straight and commanding, looking down at the woman who had spent decades trying to make me feel small. From her vantage point on the lower step, she had to crane her neck to meet my eyes. I was holding all the cards managing the historic estate she had tried to steal, while she stood outside with absolutely nothing. "Maya, please, my mother," whispered her voice cracking as she instinctively reached out to grab my hand. I stepped back, forcing her hands to drop empty to her sides. "You should not be here, Vivian. The police made it very clear that you and Marcus are not to contact me or Nana Joe." She flinched at the use of her first name, the maternal authority completely stripped from her. She did not yell or demand respect. Instead, she did something I never thought I would witness in my lifetime. My mother, the woman who demanded perfection and worshipped social superiority, fell to her knees right there on the hard brick porch. "I am begging you, Maya," she sobbed, clutching the fabric of her trench coat. "You have to help us. Marcus is still in federal custody. The bail is set at $2 million because the judge considers him a flight risk. Chloe has frozen all the accounts to protect herself in the divorce. I have no money. I have no lawyers. You have to call Agent Miller and tell her you made a mistake. Tell her the recording was taken out of context. Please, Maya, you have to withdraw the report." I looked down at her, feeling a cold, clinical detachment. "You want me to commit perjury to save the men who sent armed police officers to my house. It is not perjury if you just say it was a family misunderstanding," she pleaded, her voice growing increasingly frantic as she looked up at me from the ground. "We are your family, Maya. We are your blood. You cannot let your own father rot in a federal prison. You have the power to fix this. You control the trust. You can use the property as collateral to post his bail. You can hire the best defense attorneys in the state. You are the only one who can save this family." She was invoking the ultimate weapon of toxic households. The blood obligation. The desperate manipulative plea that demands victims set themselves on fire just to keep their abusers warm. "You did not care about blood when you planned to dump Nana Joe in a substandard nursing home," I replied, my voice echoing with icy, calculated precision. "You did not care about family when you allowed Brad to frame me for theft 3 years ago and threw me out into the street. You did not care about my career, my safety, or my life when you sent the authorities to this house hoping they would drag me out in handcuffs." "I was wrong," she wailed, tears streaming down her face, ruining what little dignity she had left. "I was so wrong, Maya. I was blinded by Brad's money. I was terrified of losing our standing in the community. I know I failed you as a mother, but I gave you life. I raised you. You cannot just abandon your own flesh and blood when we have hit rock bottom. Have some mercy. Mercy. I repeated the word, tasting bitter on my tongue. You showed no mercy when you thought you held the winning hand. You stood in my dining room and told me to shut up and accept my place as an obstacle. You watched Brad and Marcus threaten to destroy me, and you nodded along because it protected your country club schedule. I took a slow, deliberate step forward, forcing her to look up at me. I am not abandoning you, Vivian. I am simply holding you accountable. You built your entire life on a foundation of lies and status, and now you are facing the invoice. I will not spend a single penny of Nanajo's legacy to bail out a man who tried to steal it. My mother let out a strangled, desperate sob, realizing that the emotional manipulation was completely failing. She scrambled to her feet, her hands shaking violently as she wiped her wet face. Fine, she spat, her tone suddenly shifting from begging to a frantic defensive anger. Keep your precious trust. Keep this decaying old house. I do not need your money. I will go back to the bank myself. Marcus and I still have equity in our home. Our mansion is worth at least $3 million. I will take out a second mortgage. I will sell the luxury cars. I will liquidate the jewelry. I will hire my own legal team, get my husband out of jail, and we will rebuild our lives without you. She turned around, preparing to march back to her car with the last remaining shred of her false pride. You should probably call your bank before you make those plans, I said quietly. My mother froze on the bottom step. She slowly turned back around, her eyes wide with a new, distinct kind of terror. What do you mean? I folded my arms across my chest, delivering the final, catastrophic blow to her manufactured reality. During my audit of Brad's fraudulent loan applications, I traced the digital paper trail of his shell corporations. When Brad realized he could not legally use Nanajo's property to secure his primary commercial bridge loan, he needed another asset to leverage the debt. I let the words hang in the air, watching my mother's face drain of all color as the realization slowly dawned on her. Brad needed a massive high-value asset to act as cross-collateral for his failing crypto margins. I continued, my voice steady and completely unbothered. He did not just steal $500,000 from your retirement account, Vivian. He used the power of attorney Marcus blindly gave him last year to pledge your suburban mansion as the primary guarantor for his corporate debt. No, my mother whispered, her knees visibly buckling. No, Marcus would never allow that. The house is fully paid off. It is in our name. It was in your name, I corrected her sharply. Until Brad forged a series of secondary authorizations using your husband's signature. He cross-collateralized your entire estate to secure an $8 million commercial loan. And because his company is currently in federal bankruptcy proceedings, the bank has automatically called in all debts. I looked directly into her terrified eyes, dismantling her very last hope of survival. You do not have a $3 million mansion to borrow against. You do not have equity. You do not have assets. The bank officially seized your property this morning. By tomorrow, federal marshals will be placing foreclosure locks on your front doors. You have absolutely nothing. My mother let out a sound that was not human. It was a hollow, gut-wrenching gasp of absolute ruin. She stumbled backward, clutching her chest, as if she had just taken a physical bullet to the heart. The pristine, wealthy life she had sacrificed her own mother-in-law and her own daughter to protect had been entirely wiped out by the very man she had worshipped. She was completely bankrupt. No money, no home, no status, no family. You have to help me. She choked out her voice, barely a whisper, falling back to her knees on the brick pathway. Maya, please. I have nowhere to sleep tonight. I have nowhere to go. I looked down at her one last time. I felt no guilt. I felt no obligation. I only felt the profound, hard-earned peace of a woman who had finally severed the chains of a toxic bloodline. You should call Chloe, I said coldly. I hear she is very good at crisis management. I stepped back into the grand foyer of my grandmother's historic estate. I grabbed the heavy brass handle of the original oak door, and without a single ounce of hesitation, I closed it firmly, the loud, definitive click of the deadbolt locking her out of my life forever. As the heavy brass deadbolt snapped into place, the camera of my mind seemed to pull back, tracking away from the historic brick facade of Nanajo Sanctuary. It soared over the Atlanta skyline and landed squarely on the chaotic destruction actively unfolding in the affluent northern suburbs. Federal marshals were physically dragging Brad down the sweeping paver driveway of the suburban estate. He was no longer the arrogant corporate savior who confidently threatened to bankrupt me. He was a disgraced, hyperventilating criminal. His hands shackled tightly behind his back as agents shoved him into the rear of an unmarked federal SUV. The neighborhood watch groups, the very people my parents had desperately tried to impress, were standing on their perfectly manicured lawns, recording every single second of his public humiliation on their smartphones. Simultaneously, a team of bank representatives flanked by local sheriffs marched up the front steps of Marcus and Vivian's sprawling home. With methodical, ruthless precision, they hammered bright orange foreclosure notices directly into the custom mahogany double doors. The property was officially seized. The bank did not give them a grace period to pack their designer clothes or their expensive art collection. Every asset inside the house was locked down as collateral for Brad's massive fraudulent commercial loans. The luxury vehicles parked in the circular driveway were hooked onto flatbed tow trucks and hauled away while the entire cul-de-sac watched in stunned, whispered delight. By 5 o'clock that evening, the local news networks had an absolute field day. The breaking news banner scrolled across every television screen in Fulton County. Prominent Atlanta deacon and tech investor son-in-law indicted in massive federal fraud conspiracy. The investigative reporters had secured copies of the unsealed indictments. The anchors detailed exactly how Brad had defrauded his corporate investors and attempted to steal a historic Black-owned estate, all with the explicit enabling and blessing of his prominent father-in-law. The social execution of my parents was swift, surgical, and absolutely merciless. Vivian had spent 40 years meticulously climbing the social ladder, trading her own flesh and blood for a seat at the elite tables. It took exactly 48 hours for that entire society to spit her back out. Her phone, which had previously rung non-stop with invitations to charity galas and exclusive luncheons, went completely dead. The board of directors at the country club held an emergency executive meeting and voted unanimously to revoke Marcus and Vivian's membership, citing the strict morality and criminal conduct clauses in their bylaws. When Vivian attempted to show her face at the Sunday morning church service, hoping to weaponize her tears and play the victim in front of the congregation, she was met with a wall of impenetrable ice. The head usher physically blocked her from entering the sanctuary. The women on the auxiliary board, the same women she had gossiped with just a week prior, turned their backs and walked away without making eye contact. The senior pastor released a formal public statement condemning Marcus and his involvement in the financial exploitation of an elderly woman. The church officially stripped my father of his deacon title and explicitly distanced the entire parish from their toxic criminal fallout. They were officially exiled from the only community they cared about. Chloe was not spared from the devastating blast radius of the scandal. Her desperate, frantic attempt to secure transactional immunity by selling out her husband kept her out of a federal prison cell, but it did not save her carefully curated life. The moment her immunity proffer became public record, exposing her direct role in filing a false police report against her own sister, her prestigious public relations career instantly vaporized. Her elite corporate clients dropped her firm in less than 24 hours, citing severe ethical violations. She became an untouchable industry pariah, blacklisted from every major agency in the state of Georgia. Stripped of her corporate income and her husband's fraudulent wealth, Chloe was forced to vacate her leased luxury apartment. She had to pack whatever she could fit into a rented sedan and move into a cheap weekly motel completely stripped of the designer armor she had used to terrorize me my entire life. The universe has a beautifully precise way of balancing the scales. My parents and my sister had operated under the delusion that their proximity to whiteness and fabricated wealth made them invincible. They believed they could crush anyone who threatened their aesthetic, including their own family. But the very system they worshipped, the system of aggressive capitalism and ruthless social hierarchy, was exactly what chewed them up and spat them out. They had zero genuine relationships to fall back on because every connection they had ever made was purely transactional. And when their bank accounts hit zero, their perceived value dropped to nothing. I watched the news reports from the comfort of Nana Joe's sunroom, sipping my tea and feeling a profound sense of closure. I did not feel the need to gloat or release a public statement. The sheer magnitude of their public destruction spoke entirely for itself. I simply turned off the television and went back to reviewing my audit files, content in the knowledge that justice had been served cold, precise, and absolute. The warm amber light of the late afternoon sun bathed Nana Joe's historic living room in a rich golden glow. The air in our home smelled of cinnamon fresh tea and aged cedar. It was the physical embodiment of absolute safety and preserved legacy. We were surrounded by the quiet comfort of generational wealth that had been protected by vigilance and truth. 10 miles away across the city, in a decaying apartment complex bordering the industrial district, the lighting was a sickly, flickering fluorescent gray. The contrast was absolute and poetic. Marcus and Vivian sat in a cramped one-bedroom unit that constantly smelled of damp mold and cheap bleach. The walls were paper-thin, vibrating with the noise of sirens and arguing neighbors. Vivian, the former queen of the Atlanta charity circuit, sat rigid on a stained, second-hand sofa. She was still wearing a strand of pearls over a faded sweater, desperately clinging to a ghost of her former status. But there was no one left to impress. When she walked down to the discount grocery store on the corner, she wore large, dark sunglasses and a heavy scarf, terrified that someone would recognize her from the evening news broadcasts. The suffocating shame was eating her alive from the inside out. Marcus was hunched over a tiny laminate kitchen table, shuffling through towering stacks of legal bills, federal subpoenas, and past due notices. He had no tailored suits left. He had no booming deacon voice to command the room. He had tried to call his former colleagues at the financial institutions he used to advise, hoping to secure a modest consulting job. Every single receptionist politely informed him that the executives were permanently unavailable to speak with him. He was a complete pariah. The silence between my parents was deeply toxic, completely saturated with unspoken blame and bitter resentment. They had sacrificed their own daughter, their mother, and their fundamental dignity for a total mirage. Now they were permanently trapped in a suffocating cage, built entirely by their own arrogance. Chloe's descent was equally precipitous and fundamentally devastating. She was holed up in a rundown extended-stay motel right off the noisy interstate. The broken neon sign outside her window buzzed relentlessly, casting a harsh, unforgiving red glare through her flimsy plastic blinds. Chloe sat on the edge of a sagging mattress, staring at her laptop screen. It was the only piece of technology the federal agents had allowed her to keep. Her email inbox was a digital graveyard. She had spent the last 2 weeks desperately trying to leverage her old country club contacts and corporate networks, begging for even the most basic entry-level consulting gigs. But in the public relations industry, a pristine reputation is the only accepted currency. By selling out her husband and orchestrating a false police raid on her own family, Chloe had proven herself to be a radioactive liability. She was blacklisted across the entire state of Georgia. The elite women who used to invite her to lavish brunches now blocked her phone number. She had worshipped her husband's proximity to whiteness and wealth, believing it elevated her above her own family. Now she realized that his fraudulent privilege offered her absolutely no protection when the federal indictments dropped. With her bank accounts entirely frozen and her husband facing federal prison, the golden child was forced to face the brutal reality of the working class she had always mocked. I received word through a mutual acquaintance that Chloe was actively pawning her surviving designer shoes, silk scarves, and luxury handbags at a strip mall consignment shop just to cover her weekly motel rate. The woman who had proudly laughed at my independent career was now frantically filling out applications for minimum wage retail jobs, completely unrecognized and entirely ignored by the high society she used to rule with an iron fist. They were not victims of a tragic misunderstanding or bad luck. They were the architects of their own absolute destruction. They had chased superficial wealth and social superiority with such blind, ruthless devotion that they gladly marched themselves straight off a financial and moral cliff. They had traded their integrity for the illusion of power, and the universe had finally handed them the bill. The interest rate on their decades of cruelty was staggering, and they were paying it with every single miserable breath they took in their new bleak realities. Back in the bright sunlit sanctuary of Nana Joe's home, I did not have to lift another finger. I did not have to plot, scheme, or orchestrate any further revenge. I simply existed in peace, managing our protected estate and watching the natural consequences of their malicious actions run their inevitable crushing course. The heavy burden of seeking their conditional validation had been completely lifted from my shoulders. The toxic roots of our family tree had been severed, and the rot was finally isolated to the people who had cultivated it. 6 months after the federal indictments were unsealed, the air in Atlanta felt distinctly different. I stood on the expansive wraparound porch of our estate, with Nana Joe standing quietly beside me. The perspective shifted, tracking smoothly in a continuous circle around us, capturing the stark visual contrast between our property and the aggressive gentrification closing in on all sides. Towering centuries-old oak trees framed the original brickwork of our sanctuary, while cold, gray, modern townhomes loomed just a block away. We were a defiant island of preserved history in a relentless sea of corporate erasure. I held a fresh stack of notarized documents in my hands, but these were not foreclosure notices or fraudulent commercial loan applications. These were the finalized papers for the Josephine Historical Heritage Trust. I had utilized my absolute legal authority as the fiduciary to permanently transition this multi-million-dollar estate into an untouchable cultural foundation. No aggressive commercial developer could ever buy it. No bank could ever leverage it. No desperate status-obsessed relative could ever attempt to liquidate it to fund a designer lifestyle or cover up a financial crime. The property was permanently protected under rigorous state and federal preservation laws, ensuring that the soil my grandmother fought to own during the Jim Crow era would remain securely in Black hands for generations to come. But I did not stop at simply protecting the physical bricks and mortar. That would have been thinking far too small for an independent trust auditor. I strategically liquidated a carefully selected portion of the trust's diverse high-yield liquid assets, the very same assets my mother and Chloe had mocked as insignificant, and established a comprehensive community scholarship fund. Every single year moving forward, the Josephine Historical Heritage Trust will provide full-ride academic scholarships for 5 underprivileged Black students graduating from this exact zip code. We were taking the wealth my parents desperately wanted to hoard for country club dues and redistributing it directly back into the community they had spent 40 years trying to escape. The exact same brilliant, talented youth my parents used to lock their car doors when driving past would now have their entire college tuitions paid in full courtesy of the legacy my father tried to destroy. We were building actual generational wealth through education instead of chasing the hollow illusion of wealth through proximity to whiteness. Nana Joe reached out and placed her warm, weathered hand over mine, resting on the heavy legal binder. She did not need to say a single word. The immense pride radiating from her dark, sharp eyes said absolutely everything. We had secured the legacy against the greatest threat it had ever faced, our own blood. We turned and walked back inside, stepping through the original stained glass front doors that had withstood decades of history and one highly coordinated police raid. I guided Nana Joe to her favorite floral upholstered armchair, ensuring she had her morning tea and her crossword puzzle. Then I walked over to the velvet sofa in the center of the living room. I sat down, crossing my legs and resting my hands carefully on my lap. The lighting was soft and deliberate, perfectly recreating the exact atmosphere and framing from the moment I first began telling this story. The circle was officially complete. I poured myself a cup of chamomile tea from the silver pot resting on the antique coffee table. The delicate porcelain felt warm and grounding in my hands, a physical reminder of the peace I had fought so fiercely to secure. I looked directly into the camera lens, stripping away the last remaining layers of the polite, accommodating daughter I was once forced to be. I am not the family failure. I never was. I was the auditor who caught the discrepancy. I was the immune system that aggressively rejected the virus before it could kill the host. I brought the teacup to my lips and took a slow, measured sip. The warm tea tasted like absolute victory. Family is not the people who force you to sell your roots to buy fake prestige. Family is the people who stand with you to protect those roots. And sometimes the best lesson you can teach your own blood is to let them taste the karma they planted with their own two hands. I lowered the teacup, holding my steady, unyielding gaze directly on the lens. The camera began to slowly pull back, gliding away from the sofa, widening the frame to capture the beautiful, untouchable sanctuary I had successfully defended. The warm golden light of the living room held for just a fraction of a second longer before the screen faded completely to black.